so much. It's really lovely to be here in this Anthony Burgess Foundation building and to share the stage with three such brilliant young women. So it's really great to be here. So I thought I would read a selection of poems kind of connected to the north of England in honour of this location. And we're obviously in this very industrial setting with a chimney across the street. And Ian was telling me this is not actually a cotton mill, but a rubber area of Manchester. But I thought I would go back to 1901, and there were two enterprising businessmen called Mitchell and Kenyon, who you may have heard of. And they, when film was a really new technology, they would go around and film all different kinds of people in Edwardian society. And they would set up a makeshift cinema in the local fair where they had been filming. And they would charge people a penny to come see yourselves on the screen as living history. And because they had a static camera called an ordinograph, and they reckoned that they could get more money the more people they crammed into each 10-minute film, they would go round the cotton factories of this part of the world, and they would set their camera up in the mornings and after the end of the shift, and they could get thousands of people in a few minutes coming out of cotton factories. The films were found by accident. They'd been stored inside milk churns at the back of a chemist shop, and they were donated to the British Film Institute, who lovingly restored them, and so they were kind of revealed in their splendour in the year 2000, just as the next century turned into another one. Electric Edwardians. They're here to make money, the men distinguished from the crowds they move among by white hats and walking sticks, to capture as many people as possible for their fairground bioscope shows. Come see yourselves on the screen as living history. And history sets up its ordinograph and rolls and vacuums in the girls in shawls, the men and boys in caps, the entire rollicking sea of spinners and doffers and little tenters, departing the factory gates at 6 like a nation's exodus. Everyone wears clogs. Everyone has a dinner to get to. But the dock of a quarter day's pay for a minute of horseplay is no longer over their heads, and so they jostle momentarily, blurred face by blurred face, to smile or to bow for the transmission of grace in the space near the cinematographer, as though the camera cast out a fraught pool of light in exchange for their imprint, and they are standing in it. The women loiter less. A handful of men doff caps, then laugh or shake incredibly white, wide handkerchiefs at whoever may prove their witness, themselves, their wives, coal miners, tram conductors, Boer War veterans, Lloyd George in the wings, who knows the king, not to mention the unthinkable yet to be born, not to mention me. And always, in every factory gate frame, like an offering up of driftwood out of indeterminate mass after its comb and polish, or the crystallization of salt from a smoky suspension, children linger longest in the foreground, shoving, lampooning, breaking the line, or simply staring back at us across the lens's promise, as though we still held Passchendaele in our pockets and could find a way to save them. They grin and grin, not yet, not yet, while in a corner of the screen, a cart horse stumbles, flickers, flashes into darkness, where the cellulose nitrate stock rubbed off inside the milk churn. And to stay in the north of England, but to go back 100 years from 1901, this little poem is an attempt to capture the voice of Dorothy Wordsworth. She wrote absolutely amazing journals. I think she was better than her brother. And so this is just like pretending to be her for a day. 1801. A beautiful cloudless morning, my toothache better. William at work on the peddler. Miss Gell left a basket of excellent lettuces. I shelled our scarlet beans. Walked out after dinner for letters. Met a man who had once been a captain, begging for alms. The afternoon, airy and warm, no letters, came home via the lake, which was near turquoise and startled by summer geese. The soles on this year's boots are getting worn. Heard a tiny, wounded, yellow bird sounding its alarm. William as pale as a basin, exhausted with altering. I boiled up pears with cloves. Such visited evenings are sharp with love. I almost said, dear, look. Either moonlight on Grasmere, like herrings, or the new moon holding the old moon in its arms. That was the bop. So one of my favourite painters is Lowry, of course, so beloved of this city. When he died, the photographer for The Guardian called Dennis Thorpe kind of went to where he was living, the house, his sort of last house, just to pay homage. But when he got there, the estate was already clearing all the paintings. Hundreds and hundreds of paintings were being loaded up into the backs of vans. And he had his camera with him, so we went up to the removal people and he said, give me half an hour. And they gave him half an hour, and he went in and he took these extraordinary black and white photographs of Lowry's house being in the process of being stripped of his paintings. So this is photographing Lowry's house. And then he died. And so I drove to where he'd lived, I don't know why. To stand across the street, perhaps, hands in my pockets. A happenstance observer, the bricks, the Georgian front, the chimney pots and guttering, the bin, the hedge, the fence, appearing all at once, untenanted, bereft, to take a photograph or two of how that looked. But his house was a smashed hive, all industry and ruin. The door was open. Vans with their backs thrown wide cluttered the driveway. Men he never knew in life were loading up painting after painting, portraits, landscapes, mill scenes, stripping every room of his obsessions. And so I intervened, crying theft and history, and they listened. and I was given half an hour to photograph what was left before they finished. Light inside the hallway, even in February, without a flash, the staircase seeming flounced in the train of a bridal dress, shimmery as the white space in the foreyards of the factories his buckled, blank-faced people bent their bodies to. The mantelpiece in the living room strewn with stories, postcards, knickknacks, impromptu napkin sketches, the bar talk of the clocks, each set to a different time in case their simultaneous chimes distressed him, likenesses of his parents scowling down. But as though I stood in Lascaux among its sprinting forms, and my very breath was wrecking what I stared at, there were absences also, squares of thin-lined stains where, moments earlier, pictures in their frames had held their residence. Impossible now to distinguish which. My camera clicked and whirled. Upstairs I found his studio. I changed the film. They'd been in here, but not for long. Everywhere, archipelagos of canvases he'd lain against the window or the walls still held their chains. Persons closer up than anything of his I'd ever seen. A boy and girl, huddled and lovely against a fogged-out background. A man and his family, everyone in it round-shouldered and perplexed by being found. A child hitching a lift in a barrow. And then the sea, over and over, with a black ship smoking into harbour, or a distraction of yachts, or waves and horizon only depeopled. The tide that one day didn't turn, but swallowed the cacophony of Salford and Pendlebury and kept on coming on. I had a minute in the bedroom with Rossetti's luscious women standing silent guard about his bed, the counterpane remade. And then the foreman called me from the first floor landing. They had to be getting on. I should be going, and I had time for a final shot on my botched way out. His trilby and his Mac hanging from a hook in black and white. Staying with industry, but crossing over the Irish Sea briefly to Belfast, my hometown. This is a poem, again in the Edwardianate. I'm completely fascinated by the Edwardianate. So this poem is about the launch of the Titanic in 1911 into the waters of Belfast Loch, which went without a hitch. And it was just the shell of the ship, and then it would have been tugged to a dry dock and finished in the next year before its launch in 1912. So the poem is called Millahellen, and a millahellen is a fanciful unit of measurement. So if Helen was the face that launched 1,000 ships, a millahellen is the amount of physical beauty required to launch a single ship. The millahellen. It never looks warm or properly daytime in black and white photographs. The sheer cliff face of the ship still enveloped in its scaffolding, backside against the launching cradle. Ladies lining the quay in their layered drapery, touching their gloves to their lips, and just as they that go down to the sea in ships rises from choir boys' mouths in wisps and snatches, and evil skitters off and looks askance for naught. A switch is flicked at a distance, and the moment swollen with catgut about to snap, with ice picks, hawk's wings, pine needles, eggshells, bursts, and it starts. Grandstand of iron, palace of rivet, starts moving, starts slippery sliding down, slow as a snail at first in its viscous passage, taking on slither and speed, gathering in the atlas-capable weight of its own momentum, tonnage of grease beneath to get it, waterborne tallow, soft-soaked train oil, a rendered whale, this last the only Miller Helen, her beauty slathered all over the slipway. Faster than a boy with a ticket in his pocket might run alongside it, the bright sheet of the lock advancing faster than a tram. Heavy chains and anchors kicking in lest it outdoes itself, straining up to a riot of squeals and sparks, lest it capsizes before its beginning, lest it drenches the aldermen, and the ship sits back in the sea as though it were ordinary, and wobbles ever so slightly, and then it and the sun-splash tilted hills, the railings, the pinstriped awning, in fact, everything regains its equilibrium. And launched. This is a true story. So we're back in the north of England. My mum's from Derbyshire, so but was born in Nottingham, and my granny was from Nottingham. So in Nottingham, in May 1963, my great auntie Winnie was a cleaner for the Odeon Cinema, and she used to go on Saturday mornings before the kids all piled in for the matinee, and she used to clean the cinema. And the night before, four very young Liverpool lads had played the Odeon. And this is true. Perfume. My great auntie Winnie may as well have spotted a crack in the floor of Nottingham's Odeon Cinema, beginning under the stage like a telltale hairline fissure in a dam face, then zigzagging towards the exit, as had been struck by the actual bellwether that assailed her the morning she trudged in to sweep and mop and dust the flip-back seats after the pop music concert the night before. Not just the common enough stench of smoke and sweat, but an extra, still warm, acrid musk, the mixed-in fug of a stable in summer heat, hitting her like the reek of a hospital laundry, because in answer to Love Me Do, offered up in spectacular harmony, 200 14-year-old girls had instantly wet themselves, screaming, "Yes, we love you already," but inaudibly, each lone voice hopeless against the squealing sheet metal square of noise, and so their bodies had taken over. Take this river, each shower a gift, intimate and articulate, to whichever identikit member they'd pinned their collapsing stomachs on, each stream of steaming yellow flower. And as the crack grew ever wider and plaster flakes abandoned the ceiling and covered my auntie's rollered hair, she suddenly saw the street outside divide the length of the fissure, then the city, the north, the south, then all of England, mothers on one side, daughters on the other, and the chasm between them strung with brilliant washing, socks and vests and stockings and skirts and pants, rinsed clean with the blue bag in the kitchen sink, lifting in the wind. And I'm just going to read one more. Thank you so much for listening. So 7 years ago I moved to a small town in Northumberland called Morpeth. And Morpeth's only claim to fame, it's lovely, but its only claim to fame is that Emily Davison is buried there. So Emily Davison was the suffragette who threw herself in front of the King's horse. And she was imprisoned in Manchester in strange ways, and she was force-fed here on multiple occasions. So this is a poem for her, and it's written to be read at the speed of a galloping horse, so it's very quick. A tourniquet for Emily Davison. A Harridan Houdini, cages, and not just the ribcage of that final horse you hailed like a tram on Tattenham Corner. They the reins of his bridle Hinton, but corsets, railings, handcuffs, cubbyholes, heat shafts inside the Houses of Parliament taunted you all your life, fair Emily, like the keep out signs on the King's estate, or the climb of your yellowing cell in strange ways each time they frog marched you back. What manner of woman were you? Appalled editorials harumphed in a fug of pipe fumes, a child on a poster in a nacreous cardigan wept stunted tears of neglect. Mummy's a suffragette! Outside Marylebone Station. At first, the slippery trick of fasting set you free, by which the bones assert their own supremacy. Your sentences axed repeatedly just by turning the face of Kafka's hunger artist or a starveling Christ before Pentecost towards your captors. Queasiness in Whitehall, a burn like caustic soda through the notion of gentleman. But it didn't take long for the state to stiffen its spine, roll up its sleeves, and conjure a bag of tricks of its own. A tube, a buckle, a funnel, a gag, your own body breathing on its slab, forced to outfox you. You staggered from each feeding session, dishevelled and drenched, a veteran of rough seas and shipwrecks. It must have been dizzying, the tableau vivant of each arrest so grimly asymmetrical. Whatever cry for justice launched towards man and heaven, whatever momentary public flurry, exploding glass, fire in a pillar box, collapsed suddenly to a woman with her hair undone, pale as a peony, pinned between policemen. Horses, compacted torsos and high-stepping hooves flanked you here also, their sinews the sinews of the immutable world, viciously reasserted. As rain continued to fall on the reasonable cobblestones, you got escorted away from the theatre of the street like an apostate, over and over again, in violet weathers. Boyd, maverick, hooked, through my humble work. Already by 1909 you could never be bound by the epithets found on most women's headstones. From letters to newspapers, to stones, to horsewhips, to dropping yourself from a balcony. If Calvary haunted you, it was Calvary garlanded with deeds, not words, white dresses fluttering from its crosses. But the century, as well as your life, was speeding up. Portraits of nothing and very like, tinted steam, cast back at its witnesses as jittery footage. So as the 8:15 from Victoria bore south through the shuttered villages, and children stood to watch it pass as always, and a slack mist lay on the fields, and London was emptied of bookies and flower sellers, and motor cars stalled at the gates, and women in hats like avalanches chatted and laughed. Little heart flowers, little emptinesses, bubbles in the blood cascading upwards. You fingered the stub in your pocket, the scarf at your throat, and the train dispatched its smoke, and the crowd surged high as a wave and set you down on time, and the guard rail snickered. Then your ashen flashing falls so fast the newsreel almost missed it, the dynamite of the 10th of a second. Then nothing.